This is part two to the introduction to the passive voice, and I'm going to start with sentence number 3 from the sheet on Hull House. Number 3 reads, "The Archer family added a wing to the house in 1953. So to begin the process of making a passive voice sentence, we're going to identify the object of the verb. Here it's a wing, so we'll make that the subject of the new sentence. And then the verb added will change to the past tense in the passive voice. So that would be, a wing was added to the house by the Archer family in 1953. Also, you could say, a wing was added to the house in 1953 by the Archer family. Again, it doesn't matter whether the by the Archer family goes before or after the prepositional phrase that has the year. Number 4 says the National Historic Registry added Hull House to its list in 1967. This is a little trickier because we have both the National Historic Registry and its list. So I'm going to modify the sentence as I make it a passive, but the meaning will remain the same. Hull House was added to the National Historic Registry's list in 1967. So I've made that a possessive to make it easier, National Historic Registry's list. And finally, number 5, to keep the house in top-notch condition, painters paint the house every 2 years. This is a kind of sentence which we would automatically put into the passive quite often because of the redundancy in the active sentence. By redundancy, I mean the repetition of the painters paint. So to make it a passive, we would say, to keep the house in top-notch condition, the house is painted every 2 years, or to keep the house in top-notch condition, it is painted every 2 years, would even be more preferable. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that worksheet, and now I'm going to turn to the exercises in the textbook. So if you turn to page 293 in the textbook, we can review some of the sentences in the book. In exercise 1, which is simply identifying whether a sentence is passive or active. They've done number 1 for you. The first National Geographic magazine was published in October 1888, and they've marked that as passive because it has the be verb plus the past participle. Number 2 says, today millions of people read it. This is very clearly an active sentence because there's no past participle and there is no be verb here, and also the subject of the sentence, people, is doing the action of the sentence, which is read. Number 3, the magazine is translated from English into 32 other languages. Is this a passive or an active? So you can ask yourself, do I see a form of the be verb? Yes, is. And do I see a form of the past participle of the verb translate? And the answer to that is also yes. So we know this is a passive voice sentence. Here we do not have the agent because we're really not interested in that information. We don't really care who did the translating. We're more interested in the fact that the magazine is translated from English into 32 other languages. Number 4 says, my cousin reads the Russian edition. Again, it's almost identical structurally to sentence number 2. It's an active sentence. There's no past participle and no be verb here. If we turn to page 294, we can continue the exercise. Here we have sentences 5 through 11. 5 says, some of the articles are written by famous writers. We have the be verb, are, and we have the past participle of write, written. So, therefore, it is a passive sentence. And in this one, you'll see we do have the agent, by famous writers. And why do we include the agent this time as opposed to other sentences when we did not include it? That's because this is a bit of information that we want. It's a key bit of information for the meaning of the sentence. famous writers. It's not just any writer, it's famous writers. So what would the sentence be if we made it into an active voice sentence? Well, we would take the agent, famous writers, and make it the subject of the active voice sentence. Famous writers write some of the articles. In this case, the sentence is in the present tense because the be verb in the passive voice sentence are is in the present tense, so we need to keep that present tense. Number 6, Young Explorer, another publication, is written for kids. Passive voice sentence, is written. Number 7, it is known for its wonderful photography. Again, the be verb is, the past participle of know, known. And we don't have an agent in number 6 or number 7 because it really doesn't matter who writes or who knows. I mean, in fact, in number 7, it is known for its wonderful photography means by people in general, anybody who is aware of it, basically. Number 8, a National Geographic photographer took the first underwater color photos. That's an active sentence because the photographer took. That means the photographer did the action of the sentence, which was taking color photographs. Photographers are sent all over the world. Yes, this is a passive are plus the past participle of send, which is sent. They take pictures of people and nature. Very simple active voice sentence. And the last one, National Geographic is sold at newsstands. This one is a passive voice sentence because we have the be verb is and the past participle sold. So in this exercise, pretty much, well, for the most part, we're using simple present and a couple of simple pasts. When we're talking about something like a magazine that's still in existence, it makes sense that in particular we're going to use a lot of a simple present, whether it's passive voice or active sentences, because it still exists. But don't be fooled. We will be using the passive voice in many other verb tenses, and that's where it begins to get a little bit trickier. We'll see that a little bit later, probably in part 3 of this introduction, with one of the exercises that I put on the class webpage. There we'll have a lot of different verb tenses, and it will be important to be confident about when and how we use those verb tenses. Let's take a look quickly at exercise number 2, which is just writing some simple passive voice and active sentences using the information given in the chart in the middle of page 294. Again, they've done number 1 for us, which is Spanish is spoken by 329 million people. Number 2, and we have to find the right place in the chart, around 144 million people speak Russian. Okay, that's an active voice sentence because we're talking about the people doing the speaking. Number 3, Indonesian. Right away we should know that this is going to be a passive voice sentence because Indonesian is the name of the language, and the language itself can't do anything. It's people who do things. So we have here, Indonesian is spoken by 23.2 million people. Number 4, the sentence has one long blank and ends with Chinese. So we want to start with people, and in this case it will be 1.231 billion people speak Chinese. Number 5, we need to figure out which language is spoken in the passive voice by more than 66 million people. That would be Korean. So Korean is spoken by more than 66 million people. Number 6, 122 million people. And if we look on the chart, we find Japanese. So Japanese is spoken by 122 million people. Number 7, 460 million people speak English. And number 8, we have more than 50 million people, and that would be Turkish. So Turkish is spoken by more than 50 million people. Okay, now let's move on to exercise 3, where we just need to write a few WH questions and a couple of statements. So they have here a travel quiz, and the destination is La Paz, Bolivia, and it concerns Jill Jones, a magazine journalist who is preparing for a trip to Bolivia. So they just want you to form the questions and then guess the answers. We're more concerned about forming the questions or making the statements correctly using the passive voice. So number 1, they have done as an example, in which part of the country is the capital located? Number 2, you could look at the answers and see that they're all in the past, so we're going to have a past passive voice sentence. When was La Paz established? Don't forget to put the ed on the end of establish. Number 3, which of these items is produced in La Paz? Number 4, what is the main street in La Paz called? Called, C-A-L-L-E-D. And finally, number 5, which sport is played the most in La Paz? Okay, and now let's move over to the next page, which is 296. And here we have part B, of which has the answers, and they just want you to use the correct form of the verbs in parentheses. So, number 1, the highest capital in the world, La Paz, was built in a canyon in the west of the country. It is surrounded by mountains, such as the beautiful Illimani Mountain, which is covered by snow all year. Number 2, the city was established in 1548 by Spanish settlers. Number 3, agricultural tools along with food products, clothing, and building materials are made in the capital. Number 4, the main street's name changes in different parts of the city, but the tree-lined section in downtown La Paz is known as El Prado. Number 5, soccer is the favorite sport. The city has several teams. The strongest, which was formed in 1908, has won many tournaments. Okay, and we will do exercise number 4, move through that if we have time before this segment of 15 minutes ends. So here we have Jill Jones, who is interviewing a Bolivian cultural attaché for an article she's writing. The example they give, Jones says, "Thanks for giving me some time today. Here is my first question. Was the area first inhabited by the Inca?" The attaché answers, "No, it wasn't." This is a short answer. We don't need to use the past participle here. Long before the Inca, a great civilization was created around Lake Titicaca by the Aymara. The Aymara still live in Bolivia. Jones replies, "Fascinating, let's talk about farming. I know potatoes are an important food crop in the mountains of the Andes. Is corn grown there as well?" And the attaché replies, "No, it isn't. The climate is too cold. But quinoa grows well there." Jones replies, "Quinoa? How is that spelled? With a K?" "No, with a Q. Quinoa. Q-U-I-N-O-A. It's a traditional grain like corn and wheat in other places. It has been raised by the inhabitants of the Andes for 5,000 years. Jones, everyone connects llamas with Bolivia. What are these animals used for? For many things: clothing, meat, transportation.